As we mentioned last week, and if you're reading the book, I'm sure have already noticed this, that an important conversation in the book, or important theme in the book, is the role of love as a motivation for human behavior, and or sort of an orienting point for us as something to seek and hopefully experience. And so what I want to do in this section, which is likely to be briefer than this last consideration on the looking for answers, is just check in a little bit about love and what Camus is saying about love at this part of the book, and in this moment in the plague. It's useful, I think, to notice too, as we begin, that, and this is a little bit of a spoiler, and not much of one. Camus, nowhere in this text does Camus take up the love of two people who are actually present in Oran. A small exception to that may be the relationship between Ryu and his mom, but it's very small. Love at the time of the plague, love in the time of the pandemic, is marked by absence. And how we grapple with that absence and how we orient ourselves toward the pandemic in the experience of love's absence. So there are two stories in this section, or two sort of passages that I want to draw to our attention. The first has to do with this character, Grand. And Grand tells a story to Ryu about his own marriage, which is sad, and also I think suggests some of Camus' own experience of love. I don't want to engage too much in making the author's biography speak for us here, and to suggest that there's something about his biography that is going to reveal to us what he really means. I do, though, think it's worth noting a couple of things. One is that Camus had, I think, at least two, and I think three marriages by the time he died at 47. And he had several affairs as well. And so the kind of long-term relationship that is an ideal in the Western imagination is not something that Camus was, invested in, or I don't know. Maybe just let those facts speak a little bit for themselves. I think it's useful to notice, because long-term relationships in this book are not are viewed with a pretty healthy dose of skepticism. So let me tell you this story about Grand. Grand, when he was young, he and his wife, Camus sensitive to class as well, and he knows that that plays an important part in the shape of our lives. And so he points out to us that Grand and his fiancée both were impoverished. They didn't have a lot. They fall in love, and they have a very tender sort of experience of his sort of narration of his courting her and falling in love. And then he says, the rest of the story, to Grand's thinking, was very simple. The common lot of married couples. You get married, you go on loving a bit longer, you work. And you work so hard that it makes you forget to love. An overworked husband, poverty, the gradual loss of hope in a better future, silent evenings at home. What chance had any passion of surviving such conditions? So an interesting distinction here between, it's interesting in that he seems to be connecting love specifically with passion, and doesn't define passion per se. And I think that would be an interesting thing for us to discuss perhaps in the classroom, is what does Camus understand when he talks about love? Grand is a fascinating character. In one part, I think we used this description of him last week, and that his main characteristic, as Camus points out, as Ryu notices, is that he can't find the right words. He can't locate his words. And this is such a sort of a beautiful and painful motif, or through the book, is Grand is forever trying to write one sentence, the first sentence of his great novel, and he's constantly looking for the right words. If only he had the right words, he would have averted the end of his marriage. He would have been able to convey his passion or connect with it. And this is a quote from him. He says, "When we loved each other, we didn't need words to make ourselves understood. But people don't love forever. A time came when I should have found the words to keep her with me, only I couldn't." So there are a couple of assumptions built into that. People don't love forever, that I think we should examine. And then that when love ends, that words might come into play. When you love each other, you don't need words. But then when you don't love each other, you do need words. And it hangs out there. It's a question is, well, why? What do words do when love is absent? And does he really mean passion? Just leave that hanging out there for a moment, for us to work with, reflect on. The other part of this book, this passage, or this section that reflects on love directly, is, of course, the story of Raymond Rambert, who we learn is spending his time trying to escape from Iran. So he has a wife who lives back in Paris. This is the journalist that we met very early on. Well, he ceased really being a journalist at this point. His whole focus is on trying to get out so that he can get to his wife, who lives far, far away in Paris. And so he's a large, part of this is his efforts to try and be smuggled out. So through Cotard, who we're not going to spend a lot of time with this week, but Cotard is turning into this underworld figure. He's gotten connected. He's a smuggler now, and he knows all these disreputable people in the town. So Rambert finds a way to get to the people who can get him in and out of the gates. And it's a very delicate operation, and he has to just sort of be there. He has to wait for it to happen and be present. And so his whole focus is on this effort to escape. But Camus has a passage too that I want to bring in here toward the end of that narrative, toward the end of the current part of Rambert's narrative, where he's reflecting on Rambert's experience, and he talks about how two things. One is that Rambert discovers at one point that he stopped actually thinking about his wife because his total focus has been on escape, and it's only when he's thwarted in that, when he loses focus on it because it just something falls apart for him, that his reflections on his wife return. So one wonders about what Rambert's actual motivations are here, what his relationship to the plague is, and how it's getting reflected in this search for a way out. So this is what Camus tells us about Rambert as he's thinking about his wife in the early morning hours, because he confesses to Ryu that he's thinking about her at 4:00 in the morning. This is Ryu. Yet everyone sleeps at that hour, and that is reassuring, since the great longing of an unquiet heart is to possess constantly and consciously the loved one, or failing that, to be able to plunge the loved one, when a time of absence intervenes, into a dreamless sleep timed to last unbroken until the day they meet again. the great longing of an unquiet heart, which suggests to us that there might be, that we might experience our heart as quiet too. So what is it that Rambert, what has unquieted his heart? What has absence done to his experience of love? It's robbed him of some sense of course, of presence, of immediate connection, but also of a kind of certainty that relationship provides him. And we might wonder ourselves about what kind of certainty our relationships provide us, what kind of reassurance we get from them about who we are and our value in the world. What would it be to love with a quiet heart? A last comment here, which is that unlike the world of the plague, and we talked about the ways in which the world of Camus' book is different than our world in the moment, we do have ways of connecting. So in the plague, they can send telegrams, they can even send letters. We have telephones, we have Zoom, we can see each other's faces, we can have all kinds of conversations, we can be communicating through social media, so on and so forth. So there's a different kind of ability to connect that we have now. But we still experience absence. The simple absence of other human bodies. The ability to breathe together, to conspire, right? Means to conspire, means to breathe together, whisper together. To break bread together. Companionship is literally to break bread, right? Someone with whom I share bread. That is a kind of absence and a loss for us in this moment.